Hi, welcome back. We're on chapter 15 right now. Okay. It rose up in front of us, the highest, grandest mountain that I had ever seen, cone shaped and fringed at the bottom with dark evergreens and shimmering gold leaves of autumn. It changed to bare gray rock as you looked up toward the peak. At the very top, almost covered by little puffs of clouds, was a neat white cap of snow. That is Mount Hood, Father told us. We would not have to cross it, over it, he said, only go around its side on a trail called the Barlow Road. To me it seemed too hard a task. Our oxen were just bones covered by too large skin, and hardly a spark of life left in them. Rover limped or walked on three legs most of the time. The wagon cover, once so white that it dazzled my eyes, was now a brownish gray, torn and mud-stained. And for us, our clothes were patched and worn through. If it hadn't been for Mother's motto of "a stitch in time saves nine," we all would have been in rags and walking barefoot, like so many others we saw. My blue flower sprig dress had been mended so many times that it looked like a patchwork, and the flowers had faded completely away. The wood splints showed through our threadbare sunbonnets. My shoes were almost out at the toes, and Father's and John's breeches had patches on top of patches. Most of all, we were just so weary of traveling. But it had to be done. Wash the dishes, pack up the kettle and the frying pan, shake out the bedding, roll it up, and stow it inside the wagon, hitch up the team, crack the whip, listen to the wagon wheels creak as if complaining, then slowly start to turn. Another day on the endless trail. It was all I could remember and all I knew how to do. Over hills and hollows we crept along, always in the shadow of the great mountain. There were more streams to cross and another river. This one, a branch of the Chutes, was not very wide, but deep and swift. The oxen refused to go into it. Never, not even back in Kansas, had they seen water as fast moving as this. The animals would start up, but as soon as they reached the rushing water, they stopped abruptly. The poor things couldn't get the courage to take the plunge. Phew, bless me, sorry. "Hoy! Hoy!" shouted Father. He coaxed and goaded and finally, in frustration, gave them the whip. But nothing worked. They couldn't seem to overcome their fear. Just downstream was a little ferry boat. "You and the children will have to cross by ferry with the wagon," Father told Mother, his face grim but determined. "John and I are going to make these oxen swim." Father paid two Indians $1 to take us across. The wagon was unhitched and rolled onto the flatboat, and we floated easily to the other side. Then, as Lavina and I stood watching on the bank, Father and John again tried to force the stubborn oxen into the water. It was a long, hard struggle, but at last they managed to get them swimming, as soon as we were all on the other side of the river. And soon. We were now in the Cascade Mountains. Like the blues before them, they were rocky and in places even steeper and higher. The trees were giant pines and cedars and firs, so tall that it hurt my neck to try to see the tops of them, so close together that they blocked out the sun. The road was rough and hard to follow. Up and down it went, over sharp rocks, through mud holes, twisting and turning around stumps and tree roots and fallen logs. "This must be the worst road ever devised," sighed Mother after we had been struggling for hours, getting nowhere. The oxen strained and pulled with their waning strength. The wagon lurched and bounced. It was in the worst places. We all had to get out and walk, and Mother and Lavina holding Cynthia by the hand and me carrying little Elijah. Through the paper-thin soles of my shoes, I could feel every stone that I stepped on. But I didn't think of my sore feet. I had the warm, sleeping baby close to my chest, feeling proud that Mother trusted me to carry him, and I made very sure that I did not stumble. On the third day, we came to a place called Laurel Hill. "Whoa!" called Father to the oxen as they creaked to a stop. He walked ahead to look it over. I stood next to him, looking down, unable to believe that the road really went over this steep drop. It was almost perpendicular. Perpendicular is almost straight up and down. And about half a mile long, narrow and winding, rocky and muddy and slippery. It reminded me of a very tall, crooked chimney. "What are we going to do?" I asked Father anxiously. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked around, examining the nearby trees and rocks, testing the slippery slope. "Others have done it," he said finally, "and so will we. Do you see the bark rubbed off the large trees here at the top? Some have chained their wagons to a tree, then let out the chain little by little. Others probably cut down small trees and tied them on the back to break their descent, or piled rocks in front of the wagon wheels. After thinking it over for a while, Father decided not to only use chains but to drag a small tree besides. First, he unhitched all of the oxen except Buck and Ben. The other animals would be led down the hill later. He had John cut down a little tree with many branches and tie it to the back of the wagon. Then he attached a chain to the rear axle and wrapped the other end around a strong standing tree at the top of the hill. He set the wagon brake on the last notch. Mother sat watching in the tree stump, Elijah in her arms and the rest of us nearby. "Gee, Buck," ordered Father. "Gee, Ben." Very slowly, they started down the hill. The locked wheels made a dismal, screeching sound that echoed through the mountains. From up above, Father let out the chain a little bit at a time. John walked alongside Buck, one hand gripping his horn, holding him back. The oxen slid from side to side, pushed by the tongue of the wagon. In spite of Father and John's effort, I could see them beginning to pick up speed. "Oh, no," cried Mother softly. A heavy wagon clattering behind them shoved the oxen along. Faster and faster they went. I took in a deep breath and forgot to let it out, watching helplessly. John was still clinging to Buck's horn, but he couldn't hold him back any longer. His hat went flying off. His feet skidded over the muddy ground, and he was going to be trampled. "Jump," I thought. As if he had heard me, John finally gave up and leapt out of the way. As they neared the bottom of the hill, the oxen were going at a full gallop. It looked as if the wagon would run right over them. I waited for the crash, the sickening splintering of the wood, the overturned broken wagon that would be the final disaster. Then, miraculously, they were down. John came sliding along behind the wagon, picking up his hat and dusting off his breeches. "Hooray for our team!" he cheered in his loud, piercing voice. "Oh, thank goodness," breathed Mother, and Cynthia clapped her hands, laughing. Another obstacle had been overcome. But sometime during that night, while we were sleeping, poor old Buck died. The next morning, we all gathered around his body, looking down in sorrow. "I don't know what happened," Father said sadly, shaking his head. "Maybe he was injured somehow coming down Laurel Hill. Or maybe," I thought, "he had just finally worn out after bringing us so far." And I was glad that he had gotten away with that bread dough back in the Blue Mountains. Father hitched up Bright in Buck's place and put a cow that Mrs. McReynolds had left us in Bright's place. And we went on again. All along our way through the mountains, we kept seeing abandoned wagons and yokes and chains. Phew. Sorry about that. As well as dead oxen and mules. It looked as if many families had been forced to travel the last miles of their journey on foot. One morning, just as we were starting out, we came upon 3 good wagons standing deserted at the side of the trail. Father stopped our wagon, and we went to look inside. Most of the contents were still there. I saw trunks of clothes, pots, dishes, all sorts of useful things. "Take anything you need," Father said to Mother. "Oh, no," she objected. "I couldn't do that. It wouldn't be right." Father put a hand on her shoulder. "It's all right, Angelina," he insisted gently. "The owners will not be coming back. The only ones to benefit will be the Indians, and they will take what they want and likely burn the rest." Mother's face looked torn, but finally she mustered up the courage to take a few things that we really needed. A warm coat for Father, a flat iron, a coffee pot, a camp kettle, a washboard to replace the one that Polly had kicked to pieces, and a pretty brass candlestick. Later that day, just as Father had predicted, we saw a band of Indians heading in the direction of those wagons. "Oh, dear," sighed Mother with a regretful little smile. "I guess we should have taken more." On we went through the mountains, crossing and recrossing yet another river, sloshing through icy streams, climbing up and down steep and muddy hills. It was cold, the kind of damp cold that pierced through my clothing to chill me right down to the bones. But we had no snow. Most days the weather was drizzly and rainy. Luckily, we had all the wood around us now, so we could have a good warm fires in the evenings. On the 10th day after we had left the Dales, At about noon, I was walking next to the wagon, gazing down at my shoes and wondering how long it would be before my toes poked all the way through. I looked up, and suddenly through the tall trees ahead, I caught a glimpse of what seemed to be a wide open valley. I blinked. Was this some sort of vision, I wondered? Or could it be real? Looking again, I saw that the valley was grassy and sprinkled with spreading oak trees and fringed around the edges with blue-green firs that seemed to reach up into the mountains, into the blue sky above. Yes, I thought, this was the organ we had been hoping to find. Father had seen it too. He halted the team, coming back to the wagon. He looked up at Mother sitting on the spring seat. Oh, praise the Lord, he said. We are through at last. A great weight seemed to have lifted off his shoulders, and he was smiling the way he used to back at home. Mother stared ahead, her face perfectly still, her eyes bright. I saw her mouth move, but no words came out. Oh, good, said Lavina, smiling happily. Now we can play in our yard and go to meeting. Just then John came riding up with the cattle. Seeing us stopped, he looked to see what was wrong. Then he, too, gazed out of the beautiful valley below. Hip, hip, hooray for Oregon, he shouted, and he tossed his hat so high in the air that I didn't see it come down. Cynthia was looking up at him with a puzzled expression on her face. What is it, oh gun? She asked, and we all laughed with joy. We came down out of the mountains into that valley and found farms and food. Father bought a few vegetables, and I was able once again to taste something green. In 4 more days, we made our way to a place called Howell's Prairie, where the land was flat and ringed with mountains, and the soil looked rich. Here we made camp. It was October 16th. We had been on our way for more than 6 long months. That evening, sitting in a warm, close circle around the campfire, Father read to us a psalm of thanksgiving, Psalm 107. Oh, give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good, it began, and the psalm went on to tell how the Lord delivered his people out of the wilderness and saved the hungry and thirsty who cried out to him. Later, Father came to a verse that said, So he bringeth them unto the desired haven. He seemed to me that those words had written just for us. After he finished reading, Father closed the Bible, and for a moment everyone was silent. He turned to Mother, his face in the firelight looking younger than it had in a long time. Can you tell us what you are most thankful for? He asked. Mother's answer came quickly, her voice quiet and sober. I am thankful that we all got through alive. Father nodded, smiling. Then he looked across at me. And you, Mary Ellen? There were so many things, I thought, staring into the little red licking flames, but one stood out in my mind. I am thankful that you were not sick very long, I said, and John was never sick at all. I am thankful that Blackie gave us milk all the way through, piped up Lavina, and I am thankful that I got to come with you, added John. Father looked down at Cynthia, leaning sleepily on his knee. And what about you, little mite? He asked. What are you thankful for? Yaija, said Cynthia. And after that, we all bowed our heads and Father said a prayer, thanking God for delivering us from the wilderness and bringing us to this beautiful land of promise. Now they've got there.